Welcome to today's episode of WHU Inside Business. I'm your host, Niklas Wittig, and today I'm joined by Mr. Matt Moberg. Matt is a Senior Vice President Portfolio Manager at Franklin Templeton Investments, a global investment firm based here in the San Francisco Bay Area, holding over $1.4 trillion in assets as of 2020. Previously, Matt worked as a Senior Associate and CPA at Coopers & Lybrand from 1993 to 97. He joined Franklin Templeton in 99 as a research analyst, focusing on the internet, software, and entertainment industries. Gaining lead portfolio managerial roles since 2004, Matt leads Franklin's DynaTech and Innovation Fund, Focused Growth Fund, and various thematic ETFs today. What business students and young investors can learn from Matt's extensive experience throughout the dot-com boom and as a tech investor in today's world will be the topic of this interview. Matt, it's a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Great to be here.
So Matt, today you manage around $20 billion in assets across various funds and ETFs. You once were too, however, a business student starting out in the world of portfolio management, finance, accounting. Tell us, did your interests always lie in this field, or what pushed you in this direction?
Yeah, I always did have an interest in investing, first of all, and I had an interest in investing since a very early age. But what my major was actually coming out of college was history, and I was really interested in European history. Actually, after I graduated, I sort of explored the idea because I enjoyed researching things so much, and trying to use that type of long arc kind of mindset. That I actually sort of had looked into becoming a history professor. And then over time, I just decided that I wanted better application of that ability. And so that's when I really, coming out of school and out of undergraduate, and coming out with that history degree is really when I decided for certain that I wanted to be an investment manager.
And did you always see yourself taking the career path you did even back at Coopers & Lybrand, or was there a different future in mind?
No, once I graduated, I kind of knew that that was the way that I wanted to go. However, there's sort of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In other words, when you graduate, particularly if you graduate with a history degree, a lot of times you don't get to start exactly as a fund manager, of course, or as an analyst. So I really needed to sort of figure out that tool set. And I had sort of decided that I had sort of worked on one side of the brain, and then I needed to work on the other. So once I found an opportunity to become a CPA, I was very fortunate in the fact that I found Coopers & Lybrand, and they actually had a program, and that program was really focused on this idea or this concept behind it that said, you know, this is really a client business, and one thing that we're finding is we're gathering and we're finding really good CPAs. However, they're not as good on the client side. So what we're going to hire are some liberal arts majors that might be better on the client side, and we will teach them the accounting. And I was very lucky to find that program. And so I did that for 4 years, got my CPA, really certified myself, and then that's when I went to business school. And that's where I felt that, at least in the US, the idea of business school is where you can really career change. And so then I knew I wanted to career change from there.
Is the demand for that certain kind of CPA still around today? Is that a shift we're seeing, or was that only at your time?
No, I think there's a lot of ways to be a really successful investor. I happen to be a growth investor, and as a growth investor, I often argue that I use my history major more than my CPA.
Okay.
Thinking about things in these longer time horizons and these longer time arcs. However, I'm surprised by how often I need to still use my CPA. As we enter into a world with more intangible accounting and other things, I find the CPA to be still incredibly valuable. So actually, I think combining both of those has been really, really helpful.
From joining Franklin back in 1999 as a research analyst to then managing one fund to managing multiple, how has your role changed over time, and what does your day-to-day look like? What were your goals and challenges previously, and what are they today?
Well, when I started, it was really, I got to cover the internet, and I started in 1999. And for those that don't know, that was really the beginning of the bubble. And so what felt like was a really good assignment actually turned out to be pretty crummy assignment for the first 2 years. But if you take a longer term time horizon, in other words, like a 10 or 20-year time horizon, I actually turned out to be extremely lucky. And so in my career, I started out as internet, and then I layered on software, and then I added on video games, and then I layered on media. And so I was an analyst for the first 10 years. Being an analyst is certainly very important to becoming, in my opinion, a good portfolio manager, and I think it's foundational. However, I think my skill set works better with portfolio management, in which you're able to look at things from an even broader perspective. And sometimes as an analyst, you're looking at things from a very specific perspective. One thing I do think has changed over the past 20 years, and it's become increasingly more important, is when I started, sort of the game was defined more information and defined better information. And today there is so much information. It's now about how can you take all that information and then condense it down into the most salient points, the most important points of any kind of investment thesis. And so in that sense, you could argue, and it's only slightly, but you can argue that the job has changed somewhat from finding the information to actually now there's too much information and being able to whittle that down.
And speaking of change, you've led Franklin's DynaTech and Innovation Fund since 2004, obviously in a sector that has changed drastically since you first started leading it. How have you navigated that change, and what challenges has that brought?
Yeah, I think that really comes down to a process. So I joined this portfolio in 2004, but I was only the second lead portfolio manager. This portfolio has been around since 1968. So it's been around for a half a century. And so one thing that I do think a lot about is this idea of mentorship. And so I happened to work with someone who had founded this portfolio in '68, which was very prescient. The idea was to invest in innovation, and innovation will outperform the market. And that sounds today, like a very common knowledge, but I would argue in '68 it wasn't. Silicon Valley wasn't called Silicon Valley until '71. Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia weren't founded until 1972. And so this idea of doing this for a very long time has been helpful. And so when I joined in 2004, it was really about learning a process, and that process is one that's supposed to take all bias out of the way we invest. I really enjoy climbing movies, and so I was watching this movie called Meru, and it was talking about how if you really want to become a good climber, the way you become a really good climber is you start out in the gym. And you just learn there, you just learn sort of the basic holds, and you learn how to put on your harness and other things. But if you want to learn how to climb big walls, like if you want to go out to Meru or Patagonia or Yosemite or something like that, it's really helpful to have a mentor. And that mentor really helps you understand, like, when do you climb during the day? When is it too dangerous? When is the wall dry? When is it going to be wet? When does the sun hit it, et cetera? And I think at least for my career, being a portfolio has been very similar to that. And what I mean by that is you learn basically the discounted cash flow and that type of stuff while you're in business school. And that's like the climbing wall. And then you start learning more about like how to invest and how to invest in different markets at different times in the market, hopefully, and not everyone needs to do this, but hopefully through some type of mentorship. I think that actually happens in more industries than we think of. I think it can happen in like the analog semiconductor industry and other things. But that's been very helpful for my career.
And you touched on mentorship a few times now. Do you have any mentors in the space of portfolio management?
Well, I've had many, and I've been very fortunate, over my whole career to have, many mentors. However, the person who founded the fund, his name is Rupert Johnson, and I still work with him today. And so I would classify him as somebody that's probably taught me the most about how to invest and how to invest in innovation.
Lovely. I'm going to quote you here, if you don't mind. You once said, "Innovation represents a driving force behind value creation in the economy." And I would add myself that innovation almost constitutes change. So with the vast amount of change that we're seeing today in the tech sector specifically, do you see that change as an opportunity, as a challenge, or perhaps both?
Yeah, well, of course, it's really both. I think it's innate in us to want to improve our situation. I think if you look back through all of human history, what you've seen is a really long cycle of people trying to improve their situation, whatever it happens to be, whether it's better food, or whether it's better shelter, better transportation, all of that. And so that is sort of innate. Then what you sort of have to work through is, are we going through a period where that change is starting to accelerate? And is it a good investing environment to invest in that change? We would argue that it is. We actually think we're sort of at the beginning of what we would call the fourth industrial revolution. One way in which we describe it to clients, which I think might be helpful, is we use this idea of bite, atom, and gene. And that is to say that for the first time in history, we are able to manipulate things in their most base and smallest form. And as a result of that, we are able to manipulate the byte, which is data, and get the cost of that, the cost to make it, transport it, securitize it, all down at a cost of almost zero, which is why we're creating so much data with our videos on our phones and all these other things. And then we're able to do the same on an atomic level, and that allows for new materials, new energy, as well as like advances in semiconductors. And then genomics is a new area that's just exploding. And so we actually believe right now we're at the precipice of a period of tremendous change. We are optimistic by nature, and so that all sort of not only just lends us to feel like we have a really good investing environment, but it actually makes us really optimistic that a lot of the issues that we're having today in the world will be changed through technological innovation and changed through the necessity of that.
So you and your DynaTech fund have almost an established track record at this point of outperforming not only other portfolio managers, but the growth sector as a whole. Tell me, Matt, how do you develop the skill sets to be able to anticipate change in such a way that delivers that success?
Well, I think anyone who wants to get into this industry, the first thing I would tell them is they want to be a continual learner. You have to be willing to want to learn all the time. And you just have to be sort of interested in the world around you. That sounds self-evident, but it's actually not self-evident. Some people are just very interested in one specific area, which is also great because we need that too. But we probably look at things from a much broader perspective. I think the second thing is you really have to be willing to be wrong. I believe that the market often tells you if you're wrong or not, and it gives you this feedback loop very, very quickly. Oftentimes we'll have really great theories on companies of why we think they go higher, and then the market will tell us differently, and we have to listen to that. And so we really look for people with this deep humility that really understand that the world is changing, and it's for us to try to understand that and really try to understand the truth. And that's how we sort of view investing from that perspective.
And would you say that it's important to have a passion in the field that you're specifically going into, or for example, you with entertainment, gaming, software, is your passion propelling you to the level of success? Does it play a role?
Actually, what I would tell people who are coming into the industry is it's incredibly competitive. So what you really want to find are the areas that you have a competitive advantage in. So, example, I happen to think or believe that my competitive advantage is in thinking of things from a longer arc historical perspective. So then I'm a growth manager and I try to think about things from 10 to 15 years out. But I also think that there are very successful managers who have a completely different style, and they may enjoy, just for example, going through legal documents and finding differences in clauses or something like that, something that I wouldn't find to be my personal competitive advantage. Or really being able to say, look, on this pension fund, the discount rate's slightly wrong, and that makes the fact that they're not going to need to give as much to their pension extremely relevant to this investment thesis or something along those lines. And so my point is that there's a lot of ways to be a really successful investor. What you need to find is what is yours and sort of what your passion is and what your competitive advantage is. I do think that it stands to be true, the previous statements that I said, which is you have to be naturally curious. You have to be willing to be wrong. I think those are true. But then the rest of it kind of, I think, falls into what are your interests and how does your mind work and how can you take advantage of some of the inaccuracies in some of these things. Some of the companies we cover, I've covered Amazon since 1999. It's been, it's been considered an expensive stock since 1999. It's been one of the best performing stocks in the market. And so having that independence of thought of like, what is that narrative and what is the market getting wrong? I think that's something that makes the business really fun when you can find some of those and get those right.
So Matt, I know this is a tough question, but this is a WHU Inside Business classic. If you could recommend to our viewers one book that summarizes all of the knowledge and the insights that you've shared with us today, or perhaps plays along the same tune, what would that book be?
For investors or for potential investors, I really like this book called Richer, Wiser, Happier. It's written by William Green. It talks a lot about investors, and it doesn't talk only about how they invest, but it also talks about how they live their life. And at least for me, it sort of encapsulated why I got into the industry and how investing is much greater than actually just having a portfolio, but it's actually a mindset. And what it does is it goes through a handful of very successful individual investors. And then the second one I would recommend is, and this one's a little bit more fun, it's a book called When We Cease to Understand.
Okay.
And it actually talks about how some of the greatest creators in the 20th century, what happened after they made these great creations. And how some of these great creations have been incredibly helpful to society, but it also had great impact on their life, and sometimes, and more than a few times, led them into madness. And so it's a nonfiction, but then it moves into a fiction book. It's very well written, and I would recommend that one as well.
Excellent. Well, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on today and telling us a little bit about your experience and your insights and sharing those with us. To our viewers at home, thank you for tuning into this episode of WHU Inside Business, and we will see you in the next one.